So I know we're joined with some HR folks today, and so the way I've kind of structured this is I'm going to do some of the overview with ESSER 3 and talk about allowable uses, because a lot of the questions I got from the HR folks have to do with allowable uses. So I'll touch on TEA guidance there, and then after our break, we can touch on some of the planning requirements. Who what stakeholders have to be involved, when does it have to be posted, all that kind of stuff. And so that's going to, in broad strokes, that'll be sort of what I touch on today. And then also, as Connie mentioned, we will be presenting at the school board conference, and so I'll try to make sure everyone is getting the same information. And so hopefully your boards won't come bug you too much because they'll be they'll be getting a summary of the same information we'll be going over today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I'm going to start a little bit just on a subject that's a little bit aside from ESSER 3, but it's related and it interacts with it. The state budget is moving along. Yesterday afternoon, we did get some, the conference committee has announced its decisions. And just to kind of give you a quick bit of context on where we are in the process. So the budget this year is Senate Bill 1. It's passed the Senate. It's passed the House with amendments. Those two budgets are different. It then went to conference committee to have those differences ironed out. And the committee yesterday afternoon announced what those decisions were. After that, it'll have to be approved by each chamber, and then it'll go on to the governor. So just very quickly, both budgets, the House and Senate versions, of course, fully fund House Bill 3. They are both under the constitutional pay-as-you-go limit and the state spending limit, and neither fully factors in ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 state stimulus funds. The state's still waiting on some details on a lot of those pots of money, and so it just kind of it just doesn't really address all that. And so all of that is true for the conference committee version of the budget that was just announced yesterday afternoon. So again, fully funds House Bill 3. It's under the constitutional spending limits, the pay-as-you-go, which is tied to the controller's revenue forecast, and the state spending limit, which is tied to LBB's estimate of the growth of the economy. And it is some sort of holes that need to be filled in with regards to federal stimulus dollars and how it's considered. So just a short recap of what the conference committee decided. If you'll recall, in previous presentations I've given, the House had included some rider language that took a real strong stance against supplanting state aid with federal stimulus dollars. The conference committee's version of the budget does not include those riders. Now, to be clear, this doesn't, as I note there in the green text, it doesn't change the ESSER 3 status as being supplemental, but it does, it could possibly indicate where the state wants to go with ESSER 2. And so again, that's the second package that we haven't really gotten a whole lot of details from the state on yet. And so I just wanted to point out that language sort of prohibiting supplanting state aid with federal dollars was stripped out. And also some of the language that would sort of give lawmakers that would require like a full session, a special session to be called in order to appropriate those funds, that was stripped out. And so we just don't really know how the state is going to proceed with ESSER 2 in particular. The conference committee budget does not include the House rider that prohibited funds to be used for vouchers or voucher-like programs. So that was stripped out, and there is a bill that's moving forward that could create a voucher-like program. It's still got a ways to go, but it has passed out of the Senate. The conference committee budget does not include the House's proposal to take $100 million out of the enterprise fund and use that to compress school district property taxes. And so and so there's no the enterprise fund is essentially funded fully under the conference committee budget. And also it moves $60 million out of NIFA, and it uses that $60 million to fund the supplemental special education program that was created and then continued under SB 1716. And so that's one change. So for those that get NIFA out there, the allotment will likely be reduced this next biennium. Okay, so going to talk about the topic at hand today, the ESSER 3 and the rules around that, and what the state is deciding to do with all of the various stimulus packages. Again, just to recap, there are three tranches of ESSER dollars, one under the CARES Act, one under CARISA, passed in December 2020, and then the one we're going to be focusing on today, ESSER 3, which was included in the American Rescue Plan, passed in March of this year. So we know that ESSER 1 was used to supplant, of course, that was for the 1920 hold harmless. We now know that ESSER 3 is going to be supplemental funding. The question remains on what the state is going to, how the state is going to use ESSER 2 and what their plan is there. And the timeline on there is a little bit extended. I'll go into that more here in a little bit, but the state has a little bit more time to figure out what it wants to do with ESSER 2, just because of the requirements in federal statute. As y'all are aware by now, TEA has published the allocation amounts for each district in the state, and this image here is clickable for those who haven't seen it. You can go and click on that, and it will bring you to a report that will show the allocation amount for your district. You'll note here that the initial allocation is 2/3 of your overall amount, and USDE is releasing that 2/3 without having approved the state's plan for the ESSER dollars. For districts to get the remaining 1/3, that will occur once TEA submits the state plan to USDE and gets approval for that. You may have seen, I believe it was a TAA letter from TEA, or it may have been just a news release, but a call out regardless for stakeholders to weigh in on the state's plan. And so if you somehow have any free time and you'd like to contribute your thoughts and your input to that state plan, TEA does have a survey that's online, and you can fill that out and provide some feedback there. But just one thing to note, on the remaining allocation, TEA does say that they anticipate the remaining 1/3 being available later this spring. The deadline for the state is June 7th. So it sounds like TEA is anticipating submitting and getting approval for its plan prior to that. But the latest it could submit it would be June 7th. All right, and so just some of the basic timelines here with the ESSER packages. All of them, with all the ESSER packages, you're allowed to use the funding for expenditures back to the pre-award date of March 13th, 2020, and that was when the federal government declared the pandemic a disaster. So that's the significance of that date. And then you can see the end dates beginning with ESSER 1, September 22, and all the way with ESSER 3, September 2024. And that includes that 12-month carryover through the Tidings Amendment. And that's the second row here, the state deadline for awarding funds. That speaks to really why we're going out of order here, right? So we got ESSER 1, we wrapped that up. Then we got ESSER 3. And the reason is, as I note there in that bottom right box there, is in federal law, states are required to flow the funds in an expedited and timely manner, and to an extent practicable not later than 60 days after the state receives the funds. And that date, that sort of deadline for that, was May 23rd. Of course, the state made this announcement prior to that, but you'll note that the deadline for that was the timeline that was a little bit shorter than it was for ESSER 2. ESSER 2, you can see there, the state deadline was within a year of receiving funds, which would put that in January of 2022. And so the state has a little bit more time to kind of put the guidance together for ESSER 2 and decide what it wants to do with those funds from a state budget perspective. All right, so I'm sure you guys have seen this site. Again, I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this resource from TEA. This is going to be really the main tool that the grants division uses to communicate guidance regarding ESSER 3, and it's just a constantly updated workbook. And again, this link is clickable, and it'll take you right to this site, and it's updated just about every day with new items. And so once you guys get the PDF of this presentation, if you haven't bookmarked this already, I would go ahead and do so, and try and take a look at it over your morning coffee each day, because the list does grow. And one I think good bit of advice from Corey Green at TEA is try and keep up with it a little bit each day, so that way you're not way behind at the end of the week, or if you skip over it for a couple weeks. So this is going to be something that we're going to all have to kind of work into our daily routines here. All right. So since we are joined today with by the Human Resources group, I'm going to sort of change the order of the presentation a little bit and talk about allowable uses first. And before we talk about the application and the plans and all that stuff, so that way they can kind of get a clear understanding of what expenditures are allowed under the various ESSER packages. So at a high level, you can see here on this slide what's allowable under ESSERs 1, 2, and 3. We're all familiar with the allowable uses under ESSER 1, right? It's those 12 items that are on TEA guidance, and I believe we also linked to them here, but you guys have already kind of worked through that and you're familiar with that, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over those. But again, they're relatively broad. They include maintenance of existing staff and services. There is a sort of limit on the use for construction and renovation projects. You would have to go to TEA for approval on those, and so that's sort of the guidance around ESSER 1. ESSER 2 sort of clarified that you can use those funds to address learning loss, and also that air quality HVAC costs are allowable. And then ESSER 3 kind of built on that, but for the first time, the feds are now requiring how much you spend on certain allowable uses, right? So ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 kind of set out a menu of allowable uses that you can choose from and prioritize however you see fit. ESSER 3 for the first time says you have to spend 20%, at least 20%, to address learning loss through certain interventions like summer school, extended school day, so on and so forth. And so, of course, you can't spend more than 20% on that, but you have to reserve at least 20% on those activities. Now, one point here, and this is something that we picked up on from federal guidance, is, and again, this document, this link is clickable and you can go review this for yourself, but USDE in their communication to the states for several weeks now at this point has been, The differences in statute on allowable uses across the ESSER programs, it's not really meaningful. If there's a thing that's allowable under ESSER 1 or ESSER 2, it's allowable under ESSER 3 and vice versa. You can kind of use any of the ESSER dollars on any of the ESSER allowable uses. That's the guidance from USDE. And I believe in a recent Q&A that Corey Green did at TEA, I believe he sort of indicated that that was the direction that TEA would be sort of shifting to. We're still waiting for clarity on that point from TEA, but from the feds, it seems pretty clear. And again, you can go and look at their guidance document here. But as far as the feds are concerned, there's not a meaningful difference in the allowable uses between the various ESSER packages. And I'll go more into that here in a bit.
And Josh,
Yeah.
Corey, definitely, because I happened to hear that part of yesterday's question and answer session, and he definitely mentioned that. ESSER 1, 2, and 3, they're pretty much going to line up in terms of how you spend it or how what's allowed.
And it's just I guess the problematic part of this is on the application, right? It only lists out the items that are specifically in ESSER 3, and all their guidance so far has been directed towards those specific allowable uses in ESSER 3. And so, I unfortunately didn't catch that Q&A, but I did review some notes from that. And so I need to go back and watch that once that's made public, once that recording is posted. But they're going to need to make some changes or somehow accommodate that in the application. And so I'm curious to learn more about what their plan is on that. But yes, I did get the sense as well, Connie, that they are going to align more closely with that federal guidance. Okay. So just at a very high level, when you're working through all of these requests and you're thinking about, is this cost, can I use ESSER 3 dollars for this expenditure? In all of their guidance, the grant division at TEA has kind of hit on these three main requirements. Is the cost reasonable and necessary? That's kind of consistent with all federal programs. So I think that's the same standard for title funds as well. And so that same requirement holds true for the ESSER packages. Can the district justify the use of the funds to the intent of the ESSER 3 statute? And TEA's, the main way they're sort of thinking about that is this due to or in response to the pandemic? I'm going to put a little asterisk in that because I don't think TEA is being very consistent in how they're applying that, but we'll go into more detail on that here in a bit. And then the third is the expenditure aligned to an allowable activity in statute? And that's kind of what we touched on earlier. Those allowable activities as of yesterday and in line with USDE guidance that was published a few weeks back, you can really, it's not, and the allowable activity doesn't have to just be in ESSER 3, it can be any of the ESSER packages. And again, just kind of at a very high level, the guidance from TEA is that while there is while the state has decided to not supplant state aid with these dollars and flow them to districts as supplemental funds, school districts can supplant local dollars with ESSER funds. And so that's a decision that you guys can make, right? Paying for things that you would have otherwise paid for locally, and then free up those local dollars for other uses. One suggested other use from TEA and others is to take those freed up local dollars and put them in fund balance. And what that would do is essentially draw out life of the grant, right? So as I noted earlier, the grant period ends September 2024. By doing this supplanting activity and putting those funds in fund balance as a sort of restricted part of fund balance, you can essentially extend your district's use of those funds beyond September 2024 if you so choose. Of course, once you start doing this supplanting activity, you do want to be careful that you're not violating any other federal MOE requirements, such as those for the title funds, for IDEA. I see a note here also, the impact on the administrative cost ratio. And so, yeah, if you're doing this supplanting activity, you do want to be very careful about, you pull a string over here and then something else unravels over somewhere else. And so just proceed with caution if that is, it can be a very prudent strategy if that's what your district wants to do, but there are sort of things to be careful with whenever you're doing that.
And Josh, I would encourage districts. I know, of course, all of those points that you just mentioned, but we're talking about 5 years, possibly up to 5 years, if not, let's see, trying to look here to see how much life we're talking about. So whoever's working on this on your staff, whether it's your HR staff or your finance office staff, your CFO, assistant soups, people need to take really good notes, because you don't want to be audited 3 to 4 years from now and the decision was made to go in this direction, and then it could possibly cause issues for you down the road.
Yeah.
So everybody on the team needs to know where everybody's going, keep really good notes. And again, everybody does what they need to do, but even have the plan already. This is what 21, 22 looks like. This is what 22, 23 looks like, 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26. Because by that time you're using 2 years worth of local dollars, and it's a strategic plan on ESSER 3, ESSER 2. ESSER 1 really isn't a big deal to me because that was supplanting. Right. But just be aware. We see folks moving districts. We see folks retiring, and everybody just needs to be sure they're on the same page.
Right. And it's going to be a balancing act on your within your district, because clearly students have been impacted by the loss of instructional time. There's an academic impact there. Your communities have needs, your students have a need there that, as a result of the pandemic. And so you want to address that need as fully and as sort of comprehensively as you can. But you want to just make sure that this source can be as it can last as you can get the most out of it for your district. And so you kind of you're kind of getting pulled in two different directions there. So you'll have to find the right balance for your district. And it's going to be, each district is going to land sort of at a different place on that. But I would encourage y'all to kind of start those conversations now and sort of decide early if you do want to extend the life through this supplanting provision. And then as I'll touch on here in a minute, we may actually be required to do this under state law. And so Connie, did you have something?
Just one other quick note, as you're planning out these years, because folks are really concerned about, okay, if I hire staff, and HR folks are listening to us or will watch the recording, if you hire staff, then you don't want to have to let people go in 2 to 3 years, right?
Right.
Or whatever the time frame is. Well, as you have these years and the notes on the years, always keep track of what's been your average for the past 5 years. And this year it may be higher, but the past 5 years in terms of attrition. How many teachers do you normally lose? Because a lot of folks, I hear some hesitation on hiring staff because they're worried about having to let go of staff later. And I just can't see that all that, or at least as scary as it may seem to some folks, I don't see that, because districts lose staff every single year. I mean, you may be the the small district that most of the folks are from that community. And so your attrition rate is more like 3 to 5%, but the majority of districts will lose 10 to 12 to 14% of staff. So all of that can balance out. But again, it's a lot of planning. So
yeah, and I think the intent of ESSER 3, right? I mean, if we think about that 20% reservation, it's to provide accelerated learning, right? And a key part of that is additional staff, right? To do tutoring, right? To hire folks for if you hire new folks to do extended school year offerings. And so, those are all going to be additional sort of personnel costs to run those programs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be, I think it's almost, it's the intent of this, that school districts sort of hire up to help address those learning losses. And then hopefully with your programs, you're able to sort of get kids caught back up, and then there's not a need for those, those interventions to continue. And so it's just kind of that will be a part of I think many districts' plans, as they go through this ESSER 3 process. And so I think that, we don't want to set our districts up to fall off a fiscal cliff, of course, right? And create this reliance on federal dollars. But I think given the circumstances and given the academic impact of this loss in instructional time, some of that is, you're going to need to get your kids extra help. And I think that staffing up is going to be a big part of that for a lot of districts. All right, and so I'm just going to do a quick detour here into a piece of legislation that impacts this, or that may impact this decision on using ESSER funds to supplant local dollars and sort of put those over in fund balance and use and extend the life of the grant. This is House Bill 1525. It's the main school finance bill this session. There's two different versions in the House and the Senate. They're similar in a lot of ways, but there's some key differences. And one of the key differences has to do with this ESSER 3 spending limitation and sort of saving that, putting that money away. The House version doesn't touch on this at all. It doesn't include any provisions related to limiting how districts can spend ESSER 3 dollars. The Senate version of House Bill 1525 requires that districts save a percentage of their ESSER 3 funds for use in future years. The text of the bill doesn't have a specific percent listed. However, when he was laying out his version of the bill, Chair Larry Taylor did note that that percentage could be set at 40%. And so you would take 40% of your overall, under this proposal, you take 40% of your overall ESSER 3 award, and then sort of put that aside. And then you could not, you have to reserve it until the 24-25 school year. And really the way to do this would be, again, through supplanting and setting aside really the local dollars for access after the grant period. Now the bill doesn't, I don't think they were really aware of that, but that would have to be the mechanism by which you do that. And so, and as I note there, the current language in the bill allows districts to reserve those funds in one lump sum, or you can sort of piece it out over a 3-year period. And then, as I mentioned, districts wouldn't be able to access that 40% until the 24-25 school year, unless they got a waiver from Commissioner Morath and TEA. And the bill sort of sets out some vague requirements that districts would have to meet in order to obtain that waiver. And so this is something that is being debated right now in the Capitol, and so I just want to make you all aware that, since we were talking about that, this supplanting conversation and sort of giving you guys a chance to get a head start locally on what you want to do, there may be requirements coming from the state on in this area. The other thing that's included in 1525 is that the commissioner would be allowed to adjust district's funding to ensure compliance with MOE and maintenance of equity requirements under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. We're not exactly sure the mechanism by which that would occur. This language is just kind of left there in the bill, and I think it's mostly a placeholder for more to come. But just wanted to make y'all aware that they are they are going to monitor the maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity compliance, and there could be funding implications to non-compliance. Now, kind of going back to the state's reservation, required reservation, the 40% over into fund balance, and if that ends up passing, the major question is, can the state even do this? Is this even allowed? And I know a lot of folks are already getting federal regulators involved in this conversation and alerting them to the state's plan in this regard. And so this document is an FAQ from USDE, and it was put out with ESSER 1, but again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the guidance and allowable uses and all that kind of stuff with ESSER 1 kind of carry on through the other ESSER packages. So we think that that USDE would sort of implement this similarly, but again, we're awaiting guidance on that. But the answer from USDE with ESSER 1 was no, the state can't do this. States do not have the authority to limit the uses of ESSER formula funds. If it's allowed under federal law, you're allowed to do it. And so, restricting the use of it to a later date, as the state sort of outlining in their bill, at least according to this sort of preliminary guidance, it seems like USDE may frown upon that, but we'll have to see sort of how much they go after the state on that, and maybe if the state even follows through on this proposal. So that's just something to kind of keep track of as we're moving towards the end of session. Okay, so the next couple slides will go through some of the differences in statute regarding the allowable uses. You'll see again with much of them that there is a lot of duplication and sort of crossover, but I just want to point out some key differences and kind of address some questions that I've gotten on this. And so you'll see that across all of them, they allow activity authorized under the various federal programs. Of course, with ESSER 3, there's no McKinney-Vento listed there. That doesn't mean you can't use that for those activities. In fact, the fourth allowable use in ESSER 3 does address the unique needs of students experiencing homelessness. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's under federal guidance, and now TEA is sort of picked up on this, that if it's allowable under 1 or 2, it's allowable under 3, and vice versa. And this is going to be the case for a lot of those differences in allowable uses in statute, right? So with ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, it cites that districts can provide resources for principals and school leaders to address school-specific needs. Of course, ESSER 3 doesn't include that language, but again, federal guidance and now TEA guidance says that you can use ESSER 3 for those uses. That's not, just because it's not in there doesn't mean you can't use ESSER 3 dollars for these purposes. With regards to learning loss, there are some differences there. Of course, the main difference for ESSER 3 is that that 20% required reservation for programs addressing learning loss. And so that's a key difference there. But that doesn't mean, you know, once ESSER 2 comes out, that doesn't mean you can't use ESSER 2 for the same types of programs that you use for ESSER 3. Again, if it's allowable under one part of one ESSER package, it's allowable under another. Similar with air quality in school buildings, the one thing to note here is TEA is asking that districts, if you are going to do construction projects, that you do ask for sort of pre-approval. And I'll touch on it. The TEA has come out with some guidance on what the steps are going to be for getting that approval, and I'll touch on that here more in a little bit. Okay, so the next couple slides are gonna just really, they're just some key answers that have been provided in that FAQ document that I linked to earlier. A lot of these are questions that the HR group sent along prior to this presentation, and so I'll go through those now. The first one, I think, is just as you guys are getting your sort of ESSER 3 wish list together, a good place to start would be the types of activities that TEA sort of lays out in this answer about recommended uses of the funds. And so you can see below that those include professional development, such as the cost for reading academies, high quality instructional materials, dyslexia training, stipends. We'll touch on that more here in a little bit. I know the HR folks are particularly interested on that. Training related to technology integration. And then of course, extended instructional time, extended day, extended year, tutoring, that's what we touched on earlier, summer learning, of course, staffing, hiring of tutors, hiring of teachers to reduce class sizes, you know, staff retention bonuses, stipends. We'll touch on that again here more in a little bit. And of course, instructional coaching, those kind of trainings and leadership activities. I think TEA is recommending, you know, that ESSER 3 would be a good, those would be a good thing to use ESSER 3 funds on. Facilities, they specifically cite ventilation, cleaning, HVAC systems, and those are going to be aligned to sort of CDC guidelines. There are some sort of caveats when it comes to facilities, and we'll go into more detail on that here in a little bit. With regards to technology, of course, buying devices, you know, laptops, iPads, Chromebooks, hotspots, all that kind of stuff would be allowable and probably count towards the 20%. The you know, LMS costs, you know, any of those sort of application or hardware costs, those would all be allowable and recommended by TEA. And then the last one there, mental health and behavioral supports. That can include social workers, at-risk coordinators, counselors, or just training for staff with regards to mental health and behavioral interventions and supports. All those things are recommended by TEA. I did see one question about, I see a couple have come through regarding cleaning services. Does that include custodial services? So this is, my understanding is you could justify it as an ESSER 3 allowable cost. And again, TEA is being a little inconsistent here, and I'll go into why I think that here in a little bit. But with some costs that are sort of existing activities, you know, just normal activities that your district would do otherwise, TEA is saying, yes, you can do those things. Like, for example, just general teachers, right? Just instructional staff. TEA on the one hand is saying you can use ESSER 3 dollars to maintain, you know, your normal operations, maintain, keep on your current staff. That's been the response when asked about instructional staff. However, when we ask about other items, such as maintaining facilities, TEA's response is no, because a leaky roof isn't due to the pandemic, right? Even though you would need to fix the leaky roof to maintain your normal operations, just as you would need teachers to maintain your normal operations, TEA's answer is a little bit different when it comes to facilities. They want you to tie it directly back to the pandemic. And so custodial staff almost, it kind of falls in between those two things. They're staff, right? You need them to maintain your normal operations, but they help maintain the facilities, they help clean the facilities. And so, it's not clear if those normal custodial activities, you could essentially supplant the local dollars used to pay for those with ESSER $3. I think the advice would be, if you could tie your normal custodial activities to those CDC guidelines on disinfecting and cleaning your campus. And so I think that would probably be allowable, but I don't think we've seen TEA specifically address those normal custodial activities. But if you use those CDC guidelines to justify that, remember, going back to those sort of 3 bullet points I touched on earlier, you can, I think, draw a line between those normal custodial activities and the pandemic and sort of your response to and mitigation of the pandemic.
Josh, before you go on that, and if I think they're trying to address every question. So if you actually are saying, and it's really kind of tough, because as the state opens up more and we no longer even need face masks, it's almost like not quite pre-pandemic days, but so if you pose the question and say, well, my square footage, I'm now going from, if I had 20,000 per custodian, I'm now going to 18,000 or to 15,000. And so you want to increase staff. And if you even say, I'm going to do it for the next 2 years until we know that this thing is really gone, dead, or even the amount of supplies. I used to have a budget of $50,000 for custodial supplies per campus, but now I'm up to 70 or 80. And we should be able to track this with dollars. But, one of the best things that hopefully districts can do is, because this is pretty cool in a lot of ways, this smart sheet and how it's growing, and even pose it right there, pose as many specifics as you can. Because I think yesterday Corey got thrown, and really not thrown. It was just a question that he had not seen before. I'm trying to remember which one it was. And he said, I'm going to have to get legal involved and so forth. But when you pose a question, then you have it there for the auditors if it happens, in 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road. But again, it just depends. But it does get confusing, because now, as of June 5th, no one even has to wear face masks. So do we have to be concerned about how much we clean? The times that we clean the classrooms and so forth. So anyway, it's constantly changing, daily changes.
Mm-hmm. And just to that point, Connie, on the if you just go to the grant division's website, they have this whole section on all the ESSER packages. If you go to ESSER 3, they do have right here, complete and submit this form to submit your questions. And I've submitted a couple questions, several of which have gotten answered, and I'll go over those here in a moment. But this, I can personally attest to TEA. They are monitoring this, and they do, my question in particular was essentially taken verbatim and responded to over on the smart sheet. And so that was really helpful. And it took them maybe a week to get it over there, but they are looking at it, and they are, I think, trying to keep up with all the questions that I'm sure are pouring in. In case you guys haven't seen this, I'm going to drop in the chat this link to this this submission form, and you guys can, if there's particular items that I'm not able to address today, and you want, again, for audit purposes or just general guidance, you guys want that in writing, you can submit that and get going on that, and TEA will hopefully get an answer to that as soon as they can. Okay. Let's see, I see a couple other questions. I'm going to try and address these. So I addressed the custodial services as best as I can. Is there a specific link to where we can find job? Oh, and also, if you guys wouldn't mind, instead of sending me a direct message on the chat, if you can share it with everybody, so that way everyone can see the question. Is there a specific link to where we can find job descriptions, or do we adapt our own? You know, I think if you're going to move staff over to these ESSER funds, I believe part of the federal requirements, the EDGAR requirements, are that it include that in the job description. I don't know of specific source from TEA on you know, for you guys to use for those job descriptions. But if I do come across that, I can share that out. But yeah, I'm not aware of a source that you guys can pull from for those job descriptions. Next question is, with respect to technology integration training, can we use funds to train substitute teachers? And I guess train substitute teachers on your district's technology. I think that would be allowable. TEA has said that, you know, training on you know, integrating technology into your school district, which you'd want consistency with, regardless of who the instructional staff that was delivering the content that day. You would, I think that would be a recommended and allowable use of ESSER 3 funds. The link to the smart sheet is not working. I can get that to y'all real quick. The smart sheet.
I just used it on the PowerPoint, and it.
You did? Okay.
Yeah,
it's right here. I can send that.
Oh, and just keep in mind it's on the PowerPoint too, just in case.
Yeah, it's on the PowerPoint, and then if you need it, it's right there. There we go. Okay. So the first smart sheet link was, I believe, to publish a question or to send a question. The second one, I think, is to go to the actual FAQ document. Okay. For pre-award costs, is premium pay allowable for staff working during the shelter-in-place school closures? I believe it would be. So stipends and other things of that nature are allowable. And actually, you know what? I think I'm going to hold off on going through more questions, because I'm seeing some items in here that I do touch on the slide. So I'm going to table that just for a couple minutes while I get through this, and I do have a couple slides on sort of the stipends and premium pay and that kind of thing. So, and this next one here is queued up perfectly. So the question was asked if TEA, is an LEA allowed to use ESSER 3 for a staff retention stipend due to increased resignations and disruptions and that kind of thing that have created demands on staff? They say yes. Again, you have to justify it and make sure it meets those 3 criteria. It's reasonable and necessary, justifies, your district justifies the use of it to the intent of ESSER 3 statute. Again, you can just say those, you know, you need consistent, and you need those instructional staff to help address, the learning loss in your district, and to maintain operations as well. And so that would, I think that's pretty clearly allowable under federal guidance. in the presentation that Corey made, he did put a lot of emphasis on avoiding the term incentive. Incentives are not allowed under federal law. And so you don't want to characterize it as an incentive. He said a stipend would be allowable. I think that the premium pay, those kinds of things would be allowable. But just, I think the key takeaway for y'all is just don't use the word incentive. And I think that's almost verbatim what Corey said in the presentation. And so just be cautious on that.
Hopefully they've cleaned up the application, because the application had incentive on it. So
right. Yeah. So just in your justification of it, just make sure not to use that particular term. Another question I got from a Region 1 district that we got some clarity on from TEA is, can we use these funds to sort of incentivize students to attend summer school? And that's sort of a direct payment to students. And obviously that's an incentive that would be considered an incentive under federal law. And so that would not be allowed. Can ESSER 3 be used to pay for rehire penalty? And the answer there was yes. And so again, that's not, you want to describe that as help, that stipend or an extra payment to help bring more staff into the classroom, or to bring, I know a lot of districts are bringing retired staff back for tutoring purposes or those kinds of things. And so that clearly ties to the need that's resulting from the pandemic. And so you can draw a pretty clear line to those allowable uses there. Another question that we got from a couple of Region 1 districts, and this was just published, I think 2 days ago now. Would hiring a program or project manager be an allowable use with funds received under ESSER 3? And so this would be like an ESSER 3 or a federal fund project manager that would focus on sort of decision-making and monitoring activity at the district with regards to this program. And TEA's answer was pretty clear that would be allowable under ESSER 3. Another question that we got from HR folks a couple days before this presentation was regarding multi-year contracts. And so can we sign a multi-year contract and pay for all 3 years up front out of ESSER 3 money? And the answer was no. Under federal regulations, you can only pay for services as received. So you can't, if you sign a multi-year contract, you can't pay for it all during the grant period. If there's years that extend beyond the grant period, so you could pay as services are received under those contracts. Okay, so since I've kind of wrapped up my the stipend and incentive conversation, let me quickly scan the chat to see if there's other questions that I didn't answer. So I see one from Melissa. Can we use funds to acquire National Teacher Board certification related costs? I would say, again, that specific item I haven't seen from TA, but in my mind, you can connect that back to the pandemic pretty easily, right? And the allowable uses under ESSER 3, because it's helping train your teachers, and you can justify that by you need better trained teachers to address learning loss in your district, right? And so with a lot of these things, maybe it's something your district, it's just a priority of your district, and it's something your district wants to do. And maybe you may have done it had there not been a pandemic, like national board certification. That's extra training for your staff. It's probably a good idea, right? To get those resources for your instructional staff. However, if you just take that next step and use and tie it back to the pandemic, then it becomes allowable under ESSER 3, right? And so that the same case with the reading academies, right? The training for the National Board Certification. Those two things are enhancing the capacity of your instructional staff, which is clearly needed to help address the impact of lost instructional time due to the pandemic. So those kinds of activities would be, I think you could draw a pretty clear line back to the pandemic then. I got a question from my friends in La Jolla. How do we tie regular teacher salaries to the pandemic? You know, this is, like I mentioned, this is, I think, a point that TEA is being inconsistent on. And so on the one hand, I appreciate their answer with regard to regular teacher salaries. I think it's going to be very helpful to you guys if you are going to do this supplanting activity, that you can just you can sort of reclass your regular teachers as you know, over to the ESSER funds, and so that gives you guys a lot of flexibility, but it doesn't sort of mesh with TEA's other guidance on being tied to the pandemic, and so you know, I agree it's inconsistent. I guess on the one hand, I'm kind of glad for that inconsistency on TEA's part. Now, I mean, what TEA says in that allowable use answer is it's allowed under that last, and y'all know this, but it's allowed under that last item in statute, right? Maintaining existing services and that kind of thing, and existing staff. And so that's what they're pointing to. That's what I would use for the justification. I believe they even give you, like, they quote exactly what you would need to say in your justification for that, in that response. And so, you know, I don't know why they're seem to have no problem with instructional staff, but if you ask them maintaining, you know, your district in other ways, you know, maintaining the services you can provide in other ways, they start pointing to the pandemic. You know, it's not clear to me how the logic they're using to draw that distinction. But you know, I think at this point we just kind of have to take what we're getting from TEA and understand that they're allowing it for regular instructional staff, and yeah, I guess run with that while we can. Okay. Oh, and Connie, back to your point, it was Corey mentioned he needed to go to legal about using ESSER 3 to cover deficits in self-insured health plans. That was the thing that I guess tripped Corey up yesterday. And so we will look forward to answers from him on that soon. Let's see. For retire, rehire, I need to be aware of employment contract rules. I'm not super clear on what exactly you're referring to there, but yes, I mean, the question was specifically about using it to pay for the penalty. And so the TEA's response seems to be that that is an allowable use of the funds. And of course, you would need to make sure you're compliant in other areas as well. But on that specific topic, I think TEA is pretty clear on that. Okay, I'm going to kind of switch gears. The next couple items I pulled out are related to sort of facilities and other sort of big capital expenditures. And so the first one here, and this kind of further highlights that what I think is a little bit of inconsistency on TEA's part, but this question has to do with making this question is replacing buses that were damaged due to the winter storm. And you know, this TEA's response is the buses, you're not replacing these buses for a reason that's related to the pandemic. You're replacing them due to you know, weather damage. And so that would not be an allowable use under ESSER 3. So again, that's replacing buses because of damage as a result of the winter storm. However, if you purchase a bus, right, the same expenditure, but your justification isn't weather related, if that's shifted to you need more buses to support social distancing requirements and spacing, fewer kids on more buses, and that's part of CDC guidelines, then you're tying that back to the pandemic, and you are then that would be an allowable use. And so again, it's the same expenditure, but the justification is different, and that's what brings it sort of back as an allowable use for ESSER 3. I have gotten some questions about the construction costs and sort of what's allowable there. And as I mentioned earlier, TEA is requiring that districts request pre-approval of construction costs from TEA. I believe this was posted today on how districts can get approval of those costs. And TEA has sort of sketched out what that process will look like. They say a form will be published on that ESSER 3 website that I linked to earlier. And if you guys want to get the ball rolling on that, this is something you think your district is interested in, you should probably start gathering those the information listed there in those 4 items: a description of the project, how it meets the overall purpose of ESSER 3. So again, how it's pandemic related. Acknowledgement that the district will follow the Davis-Bacon Act requirements. I'll touch on that more here in a little bit. And then the dates of the planned project. And so all of those things would need to be would likely be elements that are required on the form that TEA is putting together. And so it's kind of keeping with facilities here for a minute. This kind of goes back to that example that I had with the buses earlier. This district asked, can we make facility, they have some mold mitigation issues. They are wanting to, and those are tied to the winter storm and flooding that occurred there. They want to use ESSER 3 funds to help pay for that activity. The answer from TEA is no, the mold mitigation is not due to the pandemic. That's because of the winter storm, and you can't tie it back to the pandemic, that the justification for that. And so that would not be an allowable use. You can see that the district tried to get a little creative here with tying it to CDC guidelines. And so there is, I think you do need to be a little careful about how creative you're being. But in this example, the damage was due to the storm. The renovation wasn't the result of any response to the pandemic or shift in practice as a result of the pandemic. And so that's what is leading TEA to say that that would not be an allowable use. Now, however, there are, TEA does give examples of sort of construction projects or other items that would be allowable under ESSER 3. So in this example, the district wants to buy a portable to house a reading intervention program, and that would be used to address learning loss. And so TEA gives that a green light with no problem. They say, yes, that's allowable. It's got to meet those 3 elements, right? It's reasonable and necessary, justifies the use of the funds to the intent of a statute, and it aligns to allowable activity, addressing learning loss. And so if you can tie it back again to the pandemic and to those allowable uses, then you are good to go. There was another one, I think, I guess I must have accidentally left it off, but there was another one, renovating a space, renovating an unused space in your district, or renovating existing spaces to better allow for social distancing and that kind of thing, smaller class sizes, whatever. That TEA's response in that instance was, again, yes, that is allowable. It is, it's a renovation cost, it's a facility cost, but it's tied back to addressing learning loss and sort of your district's efforts to change its instructional practice. If you need to renovate a space to that end, you can tie that. You can tie that to the pandemic, and you can use ESSER 3 funds for that. Another sort of batch of questions that I've gotten a lot, and I think TEA has included some responses to, are related to HVAC units. Can we what types of HVAC or air quality renovations or upgrades can be included under ESSER 3? I thought that this answer sort of summed up, I think, how TEA is considering these pretty well. The specific question is, does it have to have some sort of special filter or some sort of special component that's specifically tied to increasing air quality per CDC guidelines? And TEA's answer is that those sort of special components would strengthen the justification, but are not required for that cost to be allowable. And so again, if you're making these upgrades and you can justify it, make a clear argument that what you're putting in is better from an air quality perspective, and you're doing that to help your district follow CDC guidelines, then that's going to strengthen your case for using ESSER 3 dollars for that. I had a couple other HVAC related items, I think. Oh no, the next one. Okay. I see a question: can prior year HVAC projects be counted under pre-award costs, since we are required to ask for approval for future capital projects? It's gonna depend on prior HVAC projects. If that project was tied again to air quality concerns, and sort of in response to the pandemic, and you can make that case, then I think that would be allowable. And another point with yes, so if it is to address air quality response and mitigation of COVID, I think you're good. The other thing to mention is with pre-award costs, and I thought I touched on this later on, maybe we'll get to it, but I know one thing TEA addressed with that is you don't have to meet federal procurement requirements with regard to pre-award costs. I think some of them are you got to get like 3 bids or something like that for under federal procurement rules, Edgar rules, and so for those pre-award costs, you don't have to meet those federal procurement rules, and that would apply from March 13th, right, the pre-award date, to April 27th, I think, is when you guys got your allocation amount. And so if that HVAC cost occurred within that period, then you don't need to worry about that expenditure meeting federal procurement requirements. Okay. Safety and security supplies. I know a couple of districts have asked about that. This one's going to be a little trickier, and they cited cameras, two-way radios for vehicles, etc. And again, TA goes back to its standard line on meeting those 3 elements, right? Is it reasonable and necessary? Justifies the use of funds, addressing a need caused by the pandemic, and is it aligned to an allowable activity in statute. And so I think components of security expenditures could be aligned. Like for example, cameras. Cameras would help your district facilitate contact tracing, among staff and students there on campus. And so I think that that clearly would tie back to the CDC, adhering to CDC guidelines and helping your district respond to the pandemic. Some of the things like radios, that's I think a little bit harder to justify. One possible way to do some of these security, I think other ideas that I've heard are securities, like alarms and that kind of thing. TEA hasn't said this, but one possible route could be it allows your campus to monitor the security remotely, which, during this period, we've had to do a lot of remote work. And so that could be a route to getting those alarm costs justified. I think we should pose that question and frame it that way to TEA and see what they say. But just as I was kind of brainstorming on this a little bit, I think that to the extent that those security costs can help you monitor the security of your campus remotely, I think that could be a key to getting that approved and getting the green light from TEA on that. A related allowable use has to do with cybersecurity. I know a lot of districts are looking to sort of beef up their online security, and particularly just with all of the tools and information online now to deliver remote instruction. And again, if you use that to sort of justify the cybersecurity expense, then yes, that would be an allowable use because, again, tied to the pandemic. And then all the other stuff that TEA mentions, reasonable and necessary, there's allowable use in statute. And so those types of expenses, I think, would be allowable with ESSER $3. Oh, here's the procurement requirement thing I touched on earlier. And so the TEA's answer is USD allowed procured costs during the pre-award period before the LEA knew it had a grant. And so essentially from March 13th through April 26th, that's the date the allocations were made available to districts. You don't need to follow the procurement rules for those expenditures, but expenditures made after that point, you would need to follow the federal procurement regulations there. Are there any, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, are there any Davis-Bacon or Buy American requirements for any of the funds used? And the TA's answer is construction renovation projects require that the Davis-Bacon Act be followed. And so if you're going to be considering construction renovation projects, make sure that you're aware of those requirements and that your district is ready to adhere to those. And it's really, it's a preference, right? You have to, the district has to provide a preference for the purchase of goods and materials from the U.S. That preference must be included on subcontracts and purchase orders. That's sort of the gist of that requirement. All right, I think we'll do one more question and then take a little bit of a break. And this is the last allowable use question. And I thought this was important to point out to folks. Can the LEA use pre-award, ESSER 3 pre-award to reimburse itself in the amount we paid out of pocket on the PPRP, TDEM reimbursement programs, or the Operation Connectivity Bulk Order Program? And the answer is yes. So of your local dollars, right, that you used, can you use ESSER 3 to reimburse the district for those expenditures? And TEA said, yes, if you can clearly document that there is no duplication of benefit between ESSER 3 and the other federal funds. And so again, with those programs, right, you got a portion of it reimbursed. TEA seems to say that you can use ESSER 3 to reimburse the district for the portions you paid out of pocket on those programs. All right, one question in the chat. Some construction projects may have already started or may be half completed. What if Davis-Bacon wasn't being followed? So I think the answer is if that's a pre-award, that may be roped into the answer on pre-award, not needing to follow federal procurement rules, because again, the Davis-Bacon, as I understand it, it's on the you need to document that it's your preference to buy American on those with those materials, and so I think that should be okay, but again, I think with any construction project, if you're looking to get that funded with ESSER 3, you're going to need to get TEA approval on that. And there's, like I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a form very soon on that. And so I think when you're getting that approval from TEA, you should just make note that that construction project was begun, I'm assuming, during the pre-award period, and see if you can't get TEA to give you permission, just as they waived, the other federal procurement requirements. I would hope that they would make that same determination for the Davis-Bacon requirements as well. I got a couple allowable use questions I just want to circle back on real quick. The first one is it's relating to HVAC. The question was, if we recently financed 2 HVAC systems on a 5-year note, would we be able to pay off the entire note with ESSER 3 funds, as opposed to making the sort of normally scheduled payments over the 5-year period? And that reminded me of this question on row 89 here. It doesn't have to do with HVAC, but it's kind of a similar type of thing related to lease purchase of technology equipment. And I know yours is a different sort of debt instrument there, but I just wanted to bring this up as well. So TEA, with regards just to lease purchase, so sort of a separate issue here, is it is allowable as long as the original lease purchase agreement was entered into on or after March 13th. And so that I will make sure that those HVAC systems are, that it's not before March 13, 2020. The other thing to mention is what TEA says there about 6500, the debt service code. It's not an open budget category in the application. And so, and again, there's some ambiguities here with this answer, but I think that part of the answer addresses your question about your 5-year note on the HVAC thing. If you would code it as debt service 6500, then that would not be again an open budget category in the application. And so I don't know if you've already sort of made the expenditure and you've taken on debt to pay for the expenditure. I don't know if that is going to be an allowable use at this point. And so that's again, that's what the guidance here on that TEA FAQ. we can certainly pose that specifically to TEA, but I think that they're going to land somewhere similarly as they did here with this technology related question. All right. Another question with regards to a one-time payment after closing the year. I don't know if that was with regarding the poll or the part that I was presenting on. I think that a stipend. Oh, okay, regarding the poll, yeah. So again, just for everyone's edification here, I think a stipend, those kinds of things are allowable, and that TEA is pretty clear about that. Just again, don't use the word incentive, and I think you'll be okay regarding those types of expenditures. Okay, so that kind of wraps up our allowable use discussion. Again, as you guys come across ideas and you hear proposals from staff at your district, and you're curious about how those may apply, and if those are allowable, feel free to send them to TEA or shoot me an email, and we can kind of brainstorm a little bit. I think it's, as we saw with the buses example on the FAQ, it's important on how you justify it. And so if you want help brainstorming on how we can do that, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat right now. And we can sort of strategize on that before we submit it on to TEA, so that way we get as good of an answer as we can from the agency on that. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the other elements of the ESSER packages for the remainder of our time. And if you have questions, again, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. So this slide kind of highlights some of the differences between the ESSER packages with regards to the state maintenance of effort and the maintenance of equity requirements. And so you'll notice there are the maintenance of effort that, of course, there is a state maintenance of effort. There is, with ESSER 3, a state maintenance of equity. The difference for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 on the maintenance of effort is that the test is now looking at the portion of the state budget that's used for education, and that includes K-12 and higher ed. ESSER 1 just looked at the dollar amount that was used on those two items. And so that switch to the share of the budget used on education is what gave the state a lot of heartburn during the run up to the allocation announcement, because of House Bill 3, in part because of House Bill 3. All right, House Bill 3 was a huge infusion of money on the K-12 side of the budget. As a result, that sort of higher ed they didn't have a House Bill 3, right? They didn't have a big infusion of state dollars into higher ed. And so as a result, the relative portion of the budget that higher ed comprised, that shrank a little bit. And so that put the state in some hot water with regards to this maintenance of effort, because it wasn't maintaining that portion of the state budget for higher ed. And so to shore up that requirement, it's going to cost state about $1.2 billion. And I think the state is pursuing a waiver right now with the feds on that. There's been no announcement there. But if the feds come down and say, no, you have to maintain that federal requirement, or that maintenance of effort requirement related to the portion of your budget spent on higher ed, then that could result in the state having to kick in some more funding for higher ed. Or if the state really digs in its heels, it could come with some consequences with regards to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 allocations. And so that whole issue is still out there and still being worked on. And so I just wanted to make sure y'all were aware that there were some questions around the state's maintenance of effort, and currently that has not been fully dealt with yet. Of course, the maintenance of equity provisions, that's unique to ESSER 3, but because that's really fully supplemental, and because of House Bill 3 and all that, I don't think that that's really going to be a major concern for as far as Texas is concerned. However, there is a local maintenance of equity that I think does need to be on y'all's radar, particularly if you guys are going to pursue the strategy of supplanting local dollars with ESSER 3 dollars. And so the important thing to note here is that you can't disproportionately reduce per pupil state and local funding or per pupil staff FTEs to the top quartile of economically disadvantaged campuses. And that applies to fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. Now, many districts in the state are going to be exempt from this local maintenance of equity requirement. And it's districts with less than 1,000 students, or if you have one school per grade level. And I saw one example or one question related to this is if I have, 2 elementary schools, but there's no overlap in the grades. So maybe one's K through 2, one's 3 through 5, let's say. That doesn't run afoul. That doesn't put you in any jeopardy of not getting this exemption. It's just if you have multiple campuses with the same grade, that would sort of lock you out of this exemption. And so I think that this exempts about half the districts in the state, according to our sort of rough look at it. And so if that's the case, then you don't need to worry about this local maintenance of equity, but for those bigger districts, this is definitely something you guys are going to need to keep track of, particularly if you're going to supplant local dollars with federal dollars. And then this slide just kind of shows you again, just kind of reiterates that no disproportionate cuts in 22 and 23. You can still you can still cut staff or lower per pupil staff FTEs, or cut state and local spending per pupil at those top economically disadvantaged campuses, but you just can't do it disproportionately so, right? You can't do it more at those campuses than you do within your district as a whole. And so just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this requirement. The feds need to come out with more details on this. There hasn't been any guidance from TEA or really anyone on exactly how this is going to work and what districts are going to be sort of the standard that districts are going to be held to here. And so, this sort of what I presented here is just really pulled from federal law itself. We do need more guidance from USDE and TEA to really know how districts, what districts need to do to check this box, but just be aware that this is a requirement under federal law. The other item that we got some questions on with ESSER 1 has to do with the equitable services requirement. With ESSER 1, right, this was kind of a headache for some districts. They made ESSER 1 subject to the same equitable service requirements that the title funds are, and so you did have to save a portion of that allocation to be used for providing services to private schools in the area. That is not the case with ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, because they've sort of made it a little bit simpler for y'all, and private schools just get their own allocation. It's its own pot of money. And so if you get private schools asking for information on equitable services related to ESSER 2 or ESSER 3, you can just direct them to TEA, and TEA has set up its own process for for distributing funds out of that pot in the stimulus packages. I did want to highlight, of course, as y'all know, the application is open. And again, these items are linked here. If you haven't looked at that yet, there's a lot of material there. TEA has done a training on some of those schedules that are in the application and how to fill those out and what's required there. And you can those are on the link to on the TEA grant division website that I showed earlier. You can go back and watch those. And so there are some guidelines and other materials here. I just want to, and as I'm sure y'all are aware, but I just want to point out that the applications are due July 27th. And so go ahead and mark that on your calendar. And I'm sure that it's going to be a real race to the finish to get all of that turned in. There were some questions on the FAQ about, is it advantageous to, should districts try to turn it in earlier than that, or should they wait to the end? I would say that given the status of some of the bills in the legislature, if you can hold off to a point where you get more clarification on what the state is going to try to require of y'all, I think that would be prudent. And of course, as Connie mentioned earlier, session ends May 31st. So I hope that we can get some clarity on that very soon. And that should give you guys enough time to incorporate any of those requirements into your application. But I just wanted to make that point. And then sort of on the flip side of that, the applications will be processed in the order in which they are received. That's what Corey, I believe, said in one of the recent trainings. And so, the sooner you get, on the other hand, the sooner you get your application in, the sooner you can, start negotiations on the grant and all that. And so, again, you got to kind of find that balance, but I would advise at least waiting until maybe having everything, ready to go, but at least waiting until the end of session before you sort of officially pull the trigger on submitting all that. So that way you can incorporate any of the changes or extra requirements that are put in place there. All right. One thing that Corey and the other folks at the grants division spent a lot of time on talking about during the trainings was the required plans that need to accompany your application and are required under federal law. In short, it's two plans. There's a use of funds plan, and then the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. And so there's quite a bit of requirements around these two, and TEA has they have an hour and a half training just on these requirements. And so I'm not going to go into everything that they go over, but again, that training and those documents are linked to on TEA's website, on the grants division website, and you can find those. It's this one right here: planning and compliance requirements presentation and PowerPoint are right here on TEA's ESSER 3 page if you missed that training. But I'll go over most of the requirements here, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. The first one, the use of funds plan. This slide kind of highlights some of the requirements on the process for the plan and sort of what the plan does and doesn't do. So first up, within 30 days of receiving the NOGA, you have to post those schedules or a summary of the required information on your website, and then a link, I believe, needs to be provided on the application to that page for a TEA staff to check that you've been compliant with that. Next step, so that's sort of after the application process. While you're developing this use of funds plan, there are requirements on stakeholder engagement and giving the public an opportunity to provide input in the development of the plan. And it lists out specifically various stakeholder groups that need to be included. I think it includes students and staff and different community or organizations. And that's gone into it. TEA went into that part of it in a lot of detail during their presentation. So if you have questions on who needs to be brought to the table and that kind of thing, I would refer you to TEA's presentation on that. The spending plan must be in an understandable and uniform format. In their training, TEA did sort of put together a template that can be used to satisfy this requirement, and would sort of, it's essentially their best practice on putting together a use of funds plan. And I think they had a little presentation on that template during that first training session. And so again, if you wanted to use that, that's available to you. TEA says that it would meet all the requirements with regards to the plan. And so that could be a useful tool for you guys to use if you were looking for help on that. The other thing I wanted to mention is the TEA has kind of changed its answer a little bit on this. The agency is now saying that the program schedules in the application, that 3013 and 3014, they are not sufficient on their own to serve as the use of funds plan. It needs to do more than what's provided on those schedules. Those schedules include a lot of the information that would go into your use of funds plan, but alone posting those are not, that's not sufficient to serve as your use of funds plan. That's required under federal law. And TEA did go through some of what the plan must address. You have to first describe how funds will be used to implement mitigation strategies consistent with most recent CDC guidelines. A major point of emphasis here from TEA is that, particularly around the use of masks, it's okay if your board has adopted a policy to make masks optional, let's say, or not require masks. And then, of course, with the governor's announcement with regards to after June 4th, you'll need to address that in your use of funds plan. But it's okay that you aren't meeting all of the CDC recommended practices. That is not going to jeopardize the funding that your district receives. You just need to document how funds will be used and sort of the extent to which they will be used to implement the various mitigation strategies. So if you are doing activities that align with those strategies, then be sure to document those and include that. Next up is how funds will address the impact of lost instructional time. So of course, that's a 20% reservation that I touched on earlier. You have to spell out the activities that your district is going to implement and put into place with regards to meeting that 20% requirement. And again, that's the minimum. I suspect a lot of districts are going to spend a higher portion of that on addressing learning loss, but the 20% is the floor there. And then, so whatever you're not using to address the impact of lost instructional time, you have to spell that out as well in your use of funds. So how you're going to use the remainder of your ESSER $3. And then how interventions will respond to the academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs of students. And they sort of spell out those groups that sort of historically are, lower performing, when you look at the state as a whole. And so you'll need to include in your plan how your interventions are going to, address the needs of those populations specifically. And so those are sort of at a high level, the main requirements for the use of funds plan. With regards to the safe return to in-person instruction plan, again, there's a requirement that within 30 days of receiving the NOGA, the district must post plans to the website, and then the link where you will post those plans needs to be included in the application. And so that's something that you'll need to have sort of set up before you submit, and make sure you guys are sort of on the path to get that plan put together. Before posting the plan, you have to make it available for public comment and take any comments received into consideration in finalizing the plan. And then you have to review the plan every 6 months and revise as needed. And then, of course, if you guys already have a plan that meets those requirements, you can use that, but you just need to make sure that it's meeting all of the requirements that TEA laid out in that initial training, with regards to getting public impact, getting public input, and that it's being reviewed at least every 6 months and revised as necessary. In terms of what has to be sort of the elements that have to be included in the plan, it has to address how the health of students and staff will be maintained, and how the district is implementing CDC guidelines, and how the district will ensure continuity of services, and that includes all types of services, including health and food services. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that your district, maybe your board has adopted a policy making masks optional, or your administration has directed that masks are optional in certain circumstances, that is not going to jeopardize your funding under ESSER 3. You will get your allocation even if that's the case. But you just need to spell out which of the CDC guidelines your district is going to implement, and really the extent to which it's going to implement those guidelines. And you can see the recommendations they're listed here. Of course, starting off with the broad use of masks. And then, of course, we got physical distancing, hand washing, cleaning facilities, contact tracing, screening, vaccination efforts to your communities, accommodations for special ed students, and then coordination with state and local health officials. All of those are part of the CDC requirements, and you'll need to address all of those items in your return to in-person instruction plan. So that's kind of just a quick summary of some of the requirements with those two plans. Whoops. With regards to sort of fund tracking and reporting and some other compliance elements, just wanted to point out this guidance that TEA has put out, that again, all ESSER funds have to be tracked separately. TEA has set up separate fund codes for each of the ESSER packages. And then one question I've gotten quite a bit is, how does this interact with the state spending requirements? And like with ESSER 1, the state sort of combined the ESSER fund with 199 to determine if the district met the state spending requirements. Again, this is not related to federal MOE. This is relating to the state, the 55% and so on and so forth for the certain allotments. The TEA, when they're sort of checking compliance with that, they will combine the ESSER funds with 199 to determine if you met that spending requirement. And then the last slide here, I just wanted to make sure y'all were aware that, we spent a lot of time talking about the ESSER pots of money. There are other pots of money in the American Rescue Plan. There's statewide, there's about almost $280 million for IDEA. There's a little bit more than $81 million for McKinney-Vento funding, and USDE has started to put out guidance on that program. And so if you have questions about that, my email's in the chat, shoot me an email and I can direct you to those resources. And the FCC is still working on distributing and sort of setting up parameters for the distribution of $7.2 billion in funding to increase internet connectivity. And I think it's going to largely mirror the E-rate program and the way that program works. And so just be on the lookout for some additional information coming from the FCC on that. And when that's available, I'll be sure to send that out. But that could be another important use of or another important resource for your district. And then that last bullet point there, it's not, that money is not specifically for school districts, but the state is getting $16.7 billion to aid in its own fiscal recovery. And so, we kind of know how that ESSER 3 is going to be supplemental, but now as the conversation shifts to ESSER 2 and what the state is planning there, I think this is going to be an important part of the conversation. If you guys will think back to ESSER 1, and of course the state used that to supplant state aid. Part of the state's rationale for that is the state needed those funds to help shore up its own budget and to provide that consistency to school districts, to provide that hold harmless for the 1920 school year. With now that American Rescue Plan has passed, the state gets its own pot of money to help meet its budget obligations, to help sort of fill in any holes in its budget. And that's quite a bit of money that they have to work with. And so I think the argument that they need ESSER 2 to supplant state aid to help for their own budget considerations, I think that argument isn't quite as compelling. Not that it was particularly compelling the first time, but I think it's even less compelling the second time around, because of these other pots of money in the American Rescue Plan. And so I just wanted to point that out. And with that, I will open it up to any questions or comments you guys have. I know that was a lot of information, and there's a lot more to come, but I'm happy to stick around for as long as y'all would like to kind of, if you guys have particular ideas on how to use the funds or questions about the timing of all this, please drop them in the chat, or you can, if it's okay with Connie, you can come off mute and we can have a conversation about it.
It's definitely, excuse me, okay with me if folks want to unmute and have a discussion. We've got time, and obviously want to address, let's see, we already have a question here. Are the required plans need to be submitted with the application?
No, so my understanding is the plans don't need to be submitted, but you do need to submit the site at which the site where you're going to publish the plans, because that's how TEA, like the web address, you need to direct TEA where to go to check compliance with that requirement. And so I don't believe the plan itself needs to be prepared upon submission of the application, but yes, just the link to the plan, where the plans will be. Can you place the plans via link? Angela, can you come off mute and explain a little bit? I'm not understanding that question.
Oh, I was just wondering where to find them. I'm over here, I'm looking.
Well, so the plans are something that you produce. You
Okay,
produce go ahead.
They didn't have a template then.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Yes, I understand what you're asking now. So yes, on TEA's website, there's not a template for the safe to return plan yet, I don't think, but there is a template for the use of funds plan. And I think it's right here. That's what was gone over in this presentation. And I'll click on that and open it up and see. So yeah, this looks like it. Yeah, and so you can go through these various steps, and they spend about 20 minutes on this during that first training, and it sort of guides you through how to do a needs assessment, how to do your funding plan here on tab 3, and kind of walks you through various considerations there. Does that help, Angela?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Sounds like Florida's saying the link will need to be in the application.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. The link needs to be in the application, but the plan itself, right? You have the requirement is 30 days after receiving your NOGA. So that's when it needs to be published online.
Another comment, there was an email from TASB about revising our policy CB local to comply with ESSER 3 policy for public notice. Can you talk about this? Is this required or optional?
Yeah, so I believe the guidance from TEA is that that you follow local policy on providing public notice of the grant application. And so I don't think that there is a requirement that you do so. Let me double check on that. I would say it's probably best practice to do this in the way that TASB is recommending, but I don't think it's going to be too onerous for y'all to provide that notice of the grant application. But in terms of your specific question on if it's required, I don't believe so, but I'll double check on that.
I think you mentioned something about that they'll come and check what your usual stance is on public notices and tied to the federal grant. So
right, I think my understanding is you just follow your normal policy. Now, if it's required, the thing I'll check on is if it's required that you update that policy with regards to ESSER 3. I don't believe so, but I'll double check on that.
Yeah, it sounds like the TASB has possibly already put it out there. I know I saw something from TASB HR Services this week. I just haven't opened up that email. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I did get a text from one of you, if any of our districts in Region 1 have submitted, not that I know of, but that's not to say that you weren't. Everybody was very surprised when Corey mentioned that 14 had already submitted. And from what we're gathering, because again, you want to get in line, but you don't want to end up held up at the negotiation because there are so many incomplete portions or not enough information in your application. So I'm sure those first 14, I think I can safely guess, have a lot of going back and forth with the districts.
And, we want to get the money as quickly as we can, but, there's all those requirements about meaningful consultation with all the stakeholders for the plans. And so I would, I don't know if you can do all that in the in that timeline. That seems really, really tight to meaningfully engage all the stakeholders that you need to engage on those plans. And again, that doesn't have to be done by the time you submit the application, but once you do that, the clock starts ticking. And so it seemed like you're adding a whole lot more stress to an already complicated process by doing that. So I would just be careful in that regard. I'm scanning very quickly about the public notice. I am seeing actually on, I'll bring it over here to the chat, to y'all's view, is a formal public hearing required for ESSER 3 like it was for ESSER 1. There is a public notice requirement for all federal grant applications to be made available to the public before the LEA submits the applications to TEA. This is not new and is often met by a summary of the application and use of funds to be presented as an informational item at the local board meeting or by other means of public notice. So it does seem like that, yes, the public notice requirement is something that you will have to do. And so to circle back to that question, I would, make that policy change. And yeah, TA recommends that LEA develop a local policy on providing public notice to be followed consistently. So I think that's going to be a must do rather than a may do kind of thing. So I would go ahead and plan for that to be part of your process.